The essential event of the Divine Mercy Sunday Gospel is Christ's appearance to the disciples on the evening of that day. That day, of course, is the day of the resurrection. The disciples were huddled in a room for fear of the Jews. And in the middle of their fear, Jesus arrives, speaks the words, "Peace be with you," and shows them the wounds of his passion. Thomas, who was also called the twin, or Didymus, when told about Christ's appearance, he was actually absent. When told about Christ's appearance, he responds, "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand in his side, I will not believe." Thomas's doubt should not be prematurely labeled as irrational. Christ's resurrection and promise of peace is unprecedented for both the Jewish mind and the modern mind alike. In a recent audience, Pope Francis proposes that modern peace is often defined as some kind of an interior serenity. Though not without some truth, this type of peace, he says, is incomplete, and therefore it's often false. The Pax Romana, for example, the peace of the Roman Empire, was an inner tranquility, an inner serenity, you could say, but it was founded on countless battles and lopsided peace treaties in favor of the Roman Empire. Even inner serenity without obvious warfare or conflict in our lives is often based upon avoiding the plight of our neighbor, the sight of those in suffering. So that's not a good foundation. Thus, worldly peace in many ways is built on the hardship of others. This is a competitive notion of peace. As Thomas mourned in the dark melancholy of Holy Saturday, it is not unlikely that a few bitter cynicisms about peace and justice and liberation crossed his mind and might even be fueling his doubt. French philosopher and anthropologist René Girard illuminates the problem at a still deeper level. In a compelling study, Girard proposes that at the center of every human society is the problem of the scapegoat. He describes this problem as whenever each community inevitably grapples with the problem of sin, concupiscence, and corruption, they will seek out someone to blame in a spur of justice. This is actually known as the scapegoat. And most times, this actually tragically ends in the condemnation of an innocent third party. The particular examples of the 20th century are relevant here of the Jewish Holocaust and also the Jewish pogroms in Russia. They're particularly chilling examples of this mechanism in play. And these problems, this mechanism is present in every society in the world, and we've seen it go on and on throughout the course of human history. But then we have Jesus come along. Jesus is the only historical figure who effectively shatters the scapegoat cycle. Rather than remain victim to the mechanism, Jesus conquers death and visits those who first rejected him, his disciples. But there is one curious detail. His wounds remain. St. Bede believed that these wounds were Christ's final victory trophy over death. The victor, in this sense, becomes the triumphant liberator. Yet there is another level of significance. The wounds both refute and remind us of humanity's sin. Perhaps justly, Christ could have come back with terrifying judgment and maybe even vengeance. But instead, he arrives, he offers peace, and invites Thomas to examine his wounds. Putting Thomas's finger into his lacerations, he flips the whole scapegoat cycle on its head. The scapegoat confronts the sinner, but in a mode of reparation. In doing so, Christ proposes a non-competitive solution to this problem, the problem of evil, and therefore he founds a new peace. This new peace appears in the early church, where all lived together and had things in common, and they sold their possessions and goods and distributed them to all as anyone had need. That's from the first reading, the book of Acts. By his wounds, Christ inaugurates a peace that reorders human relationships with God, with each other, with ourselves, and with creation. So we now see Thomas's doubt in a deeper light. If Christ is risen, everything is changed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe, says Christ. This is certainly a better path. But God uses Thomas's uncertainty to reveal that Jesus is breaking the power of evil in two. We no longer need to be apprehensive. In history, Thomas proclaimed the gospel farther than any other disciple. This is a fully convinced skeptic. The question is, are we?